300 wolves gathered to watch her bleed, and Lady Aurelia Nightbane gave them nothing but silence. When the man she loved called her cursed beneath the sacred fire, when he named her impure in front of the Empire, she did not beg. That silence became the most dangerous weapon anyone had ever witnessed, because the Ice King was watching, and kings notice people who refuse to break. If you want to know how a disgraced half-blood became the woman who brought the most feared ruler in the north to his knees, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is riding with me through this story. The moon hung over Briarcliff Keep like a blade waiting to fall. Aurelia stood in the center of the ceremonial arena with her spine straight and her chin level, while 300 pairs of eyes stripped her dignity away piece by piece. The winter wind cut through silk banners above marble pillars stained dark by generations of blood oaths and broken promises. She could smell the anticipation rolling off the crowd in waves. It smelled like hunger, like wolves circling wounded prey. They had all come to witness humiliation. The nobles whispered behind jeweled masks that caught the firelight and transformed their faces into something inhuman. Soldiers rested gloved hands on silver weapons etched with territorial marks older than most bloodlines in attendance. The servants who lined the outer edges of the arena kept their heads down, but their eyes tracked every movement with the practiced awareness of people who survived by knowing when violence was about to erupt. Aurelia felt the weight of their collective judgment pressing against her ribs like physical force. She wore the ceremonial gown her mother had died making. White silk embroidered with silver thread that caught moonlight and made her look like something caught between ghost and flesh. The bodice fit tight enough to restrict breathing. The skirts pooled around her feet in layers that would tangle and trip if she tried to run. Not that running was an option anymore. The rejection ceremony had rules older than the Empire itself. Once you entered the arena, you stayed until the ritual completed or you died trying to escape. There was no third option. The wards carved into the marble prevented anyone from crossing the boundary once the sacred fire ignited. That fire burned now in the center brazier, blue flames that never produced smoke, old magic that predated wolves and men, and the treaties that bound them together into kingdoms. Dorian Vexley stood across from her on the opposite side of the flames, heir to the Beta bloodline, son of Lord Garrick Vexley, who controlled the Eastern Territories and commanded enough military force to challenge the throne if he chose. Dorian had courted Aurelia for 2 years. He had kissed her beneath autumn trees and promised her a future that included his name and his protection and a life where her mother's witch blood would not matter because love conquered prejudice. He had lied about all of it. Dorian wore ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine, black steel etched with the Vexley crest, a silver cloak that marked him as Beta-born and untouchable by common law. His dark hair was pulled back from a face that would have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. He looked at Aurelia the way men looked at things they were about to discard. The high officiant raised both hands, and the crowd fell silent. The old man's voice carried across the arena with the practiced projection of someone who had presided over hundreds of these rituals. Dorian Vexley, heir to the Beta bloodline and wolf of the Eastern Pack, do you accept this woman as your mate before the sacred fire and the assembled witnesses of your people? Dorian's jaw tightened. For half a second, something that might have been regret flickered across his face. Then his father shifted position in the noble section, and that flicker died completely. He spoke clearly, loudly, making sure every wolf in attendance heard the rejection and understood his reasons. I do not accept her. The crowd stirred. Whispers rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. The high officiant's expression remained neutral. State your cause before the fire. Dorian turned his gaze on Aurelia, and she saw nothing in those eyes now. No warmth, no history. Nothing that acknowledged the 2 years they had spent building something she thought was real. She is impure, Dorian said. His voice carried the rehearsed quality of a speech written by someone else. Her bloodline is tainted by witch magic that has no place in our pack. Her mother was executed for practicing forbidden arts. That curse runs in her veins. I will not bind myself to corruption. I will not pollute my family's legacy with her disease. The whispers grew louder. Aurelia heard the word witch repeated in a dozen variations, saw nobles nodding in agreement, watched soldiers exchange glances that said they had expected this outcome from the beginning. Her hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fold her arms or hug herself, or show any sign that Dorian's words had landed like physical blows. The High Officiant looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Lady Aurelia Nightbane, you have heard the rejection and its cause. Do you wish to speak in your defense?" This was the moment where tradition said she should beg, where she should drop to her knees and plead for mercy, where she should renounce her mother's memory and swear the witch blood meant nothing and promise to prove her purity through service or exile or whatever degradation they demanded. Aurelia looked at Dorian. Then she looked past him to where his father sat in the noble section with a satisfied smile on his face. Lord Garrick had orchestrated this entire spectacle. He had allowed his son to court a half-blood woman for 2 years just to create this exact moment. A public rejection that would humiliate the Nightbane name and prove the Vexley bloodline's commitment to purity. Politics wrapped in ceremony, wrapped in cruelty. She brought her gaze back to Dorian and spoke in a voice that carried across the arena without her needing to shout. "I have nothing to say to you." The simplicity of it seemed to shock him more than rage would have. His eyes widened slightly. His mouth opened as if to respond. Aurelia cut him off by turning her back on him completely. She faced the crowd instead. 300 wolves who had come to watch her break. She looked at them with the same neutral expression the High Officiant wore. No tears, no anger, no fear, just silence. And that silence became the most dangerous thing she could have offered them. Because silence from someone being destroyed means they have already accepted their fate. And people who accept their fate have nothing left to lose. And people with nothing to lose become unpredictable in ways that make predators nervous. The High Officiant cleared his throat. "The rejection is witnessed. Lady Aurelia Nightbane, you are hereby..." A voice cut through the arena like winter wind through summer warmth. "She belongs to me now." Every head turned toward the shadows at the arena's edge. The crowd parted instinctively. Nobles stepped back. Soldiers straightened. Even the sacred fire seemed to burn lower as if in deference to what emerged from the darkness. King Cassian Draven of the Frostfang Empire walked into the light. He moved like winter incarnate, black fur cloak that dragged across marble, silver armor scarred by war and etched with kill marks that documented a decade of conquest. His face belonged to someone who had stopped aging emotionally around the time he learned that mercy got kings killed. Sharp features, pale skin that never seemed to flush with color, eyes like frozen lakes that reflected light without revealing depth. The Empire called him the Ice King because enemies froze before he killed them, and allies feared the emptiness behind his gaze. He was the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, ruler of Frostfang, and commander of armies that had crushed 3 rebellions before their leaders finished writing declarations of war. Men who challenged him died. Treaties he signed held weight because everyone knew he would burn kingdoms rather than appear weak by breaking his word. Cassian stopped at the edge of the arena. The ward should have prevented him from crossing, but when he stepped over the boundary line, the air shimmered and the sacred fire flared white-hot for 3 seconds before returning to blue. Old magic recognizing older authority. The High Officiant dropped into a bow so deep his forehead nearly touched marble. "Your Majesty, the ceremony was not meant to..." "I do not care about your ceremony." Cassian's voice carried the flat affect of someone stating facts rather than opinions. He looked at Aurelia with unsettling focus, not at Dorian, not at the assembled nobles, just at her. His gaze tracked from her face down to her hands and back up again like he was cataloging information for future use. Aurelia met his eyes without flinching. She had seen the Ice King before. Everyone had. He visited Briarcliff Keep twice a year for territorial councils, where he sat in silence while lesser alphas argued themselves into exhaustion. Then he would speak once, and his single statement would end debates that had raged for hours. But she had never stood this close to him before, had never felt the weight of his complete attention focused entirely on her. It felt like standing in the path of an avalanche. Cassian turned to Dorian. The beta air had gone pale, but he held his ground with the stubborn courage of someone whose family had enough military power to make insulting them costly. "Your Majesty," Dorian said carefully, "this woman is not worthy of..." "I did not ask for your opinion." Cassian's tone did not change. It remained flat, empty. Somehow that made the threat more effective than shouting would have been. You rejected her. She is unclaimed. I am claiming her now. The arena erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted questions. Soldiers shifted nervously. The high officiant looked like he might faint from the political complications suddenly dropped into his lap. Lord Garrick Vexley stood from his seat in the noble section. His voice boomed across the arena with the practiced authority of a man who had commanded armies before Cassian was born. Your Majesty, with all respect, you cannot claim a rejected half-blood during a sacred ceremony. It violates tradition. It undermines the authority of... Cassian looked at him. Just looked. Lord Garrick's voice died mid-sentence. The older man actually took a step backward despite the distance separating them. The Ice King returned his attention to Aurelia. He walked toward her with the same unhurried pace. The crowd parted around him like water around stone. When he stopped in front of her, they were close enough that Aurelia could see the silver threading through dark hair at his temples. Close enough to notice the absolute stillness in his chest. He breathed so shallowly she almost could not detect movement, like something not entirely alive. "Do you wish to leave with me?" Cassian asked. It was the first question anyone had asked her all night. Not a command, not an assumption, an actual question that offered choice. Aurelia glanced past him at Dorian. The man she had loved stood frozen with his father's political calculations written across his face. She looked at the crowd. 300 wolves who had gathered to witness her humiliation and would remember this night as entertainment. She looked back at Cassian, at the Ice King who felt nothing and feared nothing and ruled through strategic brutality instead of emotion. "Yes," she said. Something flickered behind his eyes. There and gone so fast she almost missed it. His wolf responding to her voice in a way that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. Cassian extended his hand. Aurelia placed her palm against his, and the arena disappeared into winter storm. Geek. Frostfang Citadel rose from the mountains like a black cathedral carved from ice and war. Aurelia watched it approach through the carriage window, while her new reality settled over her shoulders like a cloak made of lead. She had left Briarcliff Keep 2 hours ago, left behind everything she knew, her mother's grave, the small house where she had grown up, the life she had tried to build despite the witch blood everyone feared. All of it gone because a king noticed her silence. The carriage rattled over Stone Road. Inside the cabin, Cassian sat across from her in absolute stillness. He had not spoken since they left the arena, had not looked at her, just sat with his hands resting on his knees and his gaze fixed on some middle distance that might have been the window or might have been nothing at all. Aurelia broke the silence because someone had to. "Why did you claim me?" Cassian's eyes shifted to her face. For 3 seconds, he did not respond. Then he spoke in that same flat tone that revealed nothing. "My wolf woke when you refused to beg." That was not an answer. That was a fragment that raised more questions than it solved. "Your wolf?" Aurelia kept her voice level. "Every alpha has a wolf. Mine has been dormant for 15 years. Cassian's expression did not change. No emotion crossed his face. It stopped responding to anything. No rage, no joy, no instinct. Just silence. He said it the way someone might describe a broken weapon. Factual. Detached. Like discussing a tactical disadvantage rather than a fundamental piece of his humanity that had died while he was still breathing. Aurelia absorbed that information. She had heard rumors about the Ice King's emptiness, whispers that he felt nothing, stories about how he executed people without hesitation because emotion could not complicate his decisions. She had assumed those were exaggerations. Apparently not. And it woke tonight? She pushed for clarity. When? When you turned your back on your rejection and looked at the crowd like you had already decided they could not break you. Cassian tilted his head slightly. The gesture looked analytical rather than curious. My wolf responded. For the first time in 15 years, I felt it move. Aurelia did not know what to say to that. She settled for honesty. I do not understand what you want from me. Neither do I yet. Cassian leaned back against the carriage seat. But I have not felt anything in a very long time. If you can wake what has been dead inside me, I will keep you alive to see if it happens again. The brutal honesty of it struck harder than pretty lies would have. He was not pretending this was romance, was not offering comfort or false promises, just stating that she had value because she triggered a response in his dormant wolf and he wanted to study that response like a general studying enemy tactics. Aurelia looked out the window at Frostfang Citadel growing larger against the night sky. What happens if I cannot wake it again? Then you will live in the Citadel as my claimed mate, and I will ensure no one harms you. Cassian's tone remained unchanged. You will be protected, fed, given chambers and servants. But you will serve no purpose beyond existing. A gilded cage with a frozen king for a jailer. Aurelia almost laughed. Almost. But the sound died in her throat because laughing at the Ice King seemed like the kind of mistake people did not survive. The carriage passed through massive gates that groaned closed behind them with the finality of a crypt ceiling. Frostfang Citadel swallowed them into its courtyard of black stone and frozen gardens where nothing living had grown in decades. Servants emerged to handle the horses. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who knew their king did not tolerate delays or questions. No one made eye contact. No one spoke unnecessarily. Cassian stepped from the carriage and turned to offer Aurelia his hand again. She took it and stepped down into the courtyard that smelled like winter and old blood. A man approached from the citadel entrance. Tall, elderly, but solid. He wore the formal robes of a senior advisor with enough medals and territorial marks to indicate he had served the crown through multiple rulers. Your Majesty, the man said with a bow. We were not expecting your return tonight. Plans changed, Cassian replied. This is Lady Aurelia Nightbane. She will reside in the Citadel as my claimed mate. Prepare the eastern chambers, assign her personal servants, ensure she has everything she requires. The advisor's eyes flicked to Aurelia with barely concealed shock. He recovered quickly. Of course, Your Majesty. Should I summon the council to discuss? No. Cassian started walking toward the Citadel entrance. Inform them tomorrow. He did not wait to see if his orders were followed. Just walked away with the absolute confidence of someone who knew hesitation. Never crossed the minds of people under his command. The advisor turned to Aurelia. He studied her with the sharp assessment of a man whose job was identifying threats before they materialized. Lady Nightbane, he said carefully, I am Lord Malachar Vane, senior advisor to the crown. If you will follow me, I will show you to your chambers. His voice carried the polite neutrality of someone buying time to figure out what kind of problem she represented. Aurelia followed him into Frostfang Citadel and tried not to think about the fact that she had just traded one rejection for another kind of prison entirely. The eastern chambers occupied an entire wing of the citadel that looked like it had not been used in years. Aurelia walked through rooms filled with furniture draped in dust covers and windows that overlooked frozen gardens 3 stories below. Everything was beautiful in the way abandoned things were beautiful, perfect and empty and untouched by anything resembling life. Lord Malachar stood in the doorway of the main chamber while servants removed dust covers and lit fires in hearths that probably had not burned in months. These were Queen Isara's chambers, Malachar said. The late queen. His Majesty's mother. She died when he was 12. Aurelia ran her fingers over a dresser carved from dark wood. The surface was smooth, cold, like everything else in this place. How did she die? The curse. Malachar's expression tightened. The royal bloodline has been cursed for 300 years. Each ruler loses warmth, emotion, and humanity as they age. Queen Isara tried to fight it. She lasted longer than most. But in the end, the curse consumed her like it consumes all of them. He said it matter-of-factly. The way someone might describe seasonal weather patterns or crop rotations. Aurelia turned to face him. And King Cassian? Halfway consumed already. Malachar crossed his arms. He has perhaps 5 years before he becomes completely incapable of emotion. After that, he will be pure instinct and strategy. A calculating predator wearing a crown. The servants finished their work and filed out silently. Malachar watched them go before returning his attention to Aurelia. I do not know why His Majesty claimed you tonight, he said quietly, but I have served 3 kings who slowly lost their humanity to this curse. I have watched good men become monsters. If you have any power to help him, I suggest you use it quickly. Before she could respond, Malachar bowed and left. Aurelia stood alone in chambers that belonged to a dead queen and looked out windows at an empire built on emotional starvation. She thought about Dorian's rejection, about 300 wolves who had gathered to watch her humiliate herself. about her mother, who died for practicing magic that might have saved all of them. Then she thought about Cassian's wolf waking after 15 years of silence. Maybe there was more to this than survival. Maybe there was something like purpose hiding inside the frozen hell she had just entered. Or maybe she was lying to herself because accepting that she had value was easier than accepting she had just become property of a king who felt nothing. Either way, she was here now, and the Ice King expected results. But 3 days passed before Cassian summoned her. Aurelia spent that time learning to navigate Frostfang Citadel's endless corridors and frozen courtyards while servants watched her with the wary curiosity usually reserved for wild animals brought inside. No one spoke to her beyond necessary formalities. No one asked questions. They just performed their duties and disappeared like ghosts. She met no other nobles, saw no other women of any status. The citadel felt like a mausoleum where the only thing still breathing was the king. When the summons finally came, a servant led her through passages lined with portraits of previous Draven rulers. Every face looked progressively colder as the paintings descended through generations. The earliest kings had warmth in their eyes, smiles that looked genuine. By the time the portraits reached Cassian's grandfather, there was nothing behind their eyes except ice. The servant stopped outside massive doors carved with territorial marks. "His Majesty is inside," the woman said. Then she bowed and left before Aurelia could ask questions. Aurelia pushed open the doors and stepped into a war room that smelled like maps and old leather. Cassian stood behind a table covered in territorial charts and military reports. He looked exactly the same as he had 3 nights ago. Same empty expression, same shallow breathing, same sense that he was only partially present inside his own body. He did not look up when she entered. "Close the door," he said. Aurelia closed it. The sound echoed through the room like a lock engaging. Cassian finally lifted his gaze from the maps. He studied her with that same unsettling focus. "You have been avoiding the Citadel staff." It was not a question, just an observation delivered in that flat tone. "They have been avoiding me first," Aurelia replied. "Smart of them." Cassian circled around the table. "You are an unknown variable in a place where unknowns get people killed. They will watch you until they decide whether you are dangerous." "Am I dangerous?" "I do not know yet." He stopped 3 feet away. "But my wolf has been more active in the past 3 days than it was in the previous 15 years combined. So you are something." Aurelia held his gaze. "What do you want from me?" "I want to understand why you affect me." Cassian tilted his head slightly. "I have been trying to determine if it is your bloodline, your silence, or something else entirely. I have found no pattern. Maybe there is no pattern to find." "Everything has patterns." His voice carried absolute certainty. "I have built an empire on identifying patterns and exploiting them. You are a puzzle I intend to solve." He moved closer. Close enough that Aurelia could see frost forming along his jawline. Thin, crystalline patterns that spread across his skin like living ice. It happened when he tried to feel emotion, the curse attacking him in real time. Cassian seemed unaware of it, or perhaps so accustomed that he no longer noticed. "Touch me," he said. Aurelia blinked. "What?" "My wolf responds when you are near. I want to see if physical contact increases the effect." He extended his hand palm up. It was a clinical request. Nothing romantic or gentle about it. Just a king conducting an experiment on his own failing humanity. Aurelia placed her hand against his. The moment their skin made contact, warmth flooded up her arm and into her chest. Not heat. Something deeper. Like touching summer after living through endless winter. Cassian's eyes widened. The frost on his jaw melted instantly. Color rushed into his face. His breathing deepened. For 5 seconds, he looked completely alive. Then he pulled his hand back and the warmth vanished. His expression flattened. The frost returned, but his hand was shaking. "What did you feel?" Aurelia asked. "Everything." Cassian stared at his palm like it had betrayed him. Rage, fear, hope, grief, all of it at once. It was... He stopped, turned away from her. His shoulders rigid. "It was overwhelming," he finished quietly. Aurelia watched frost spread across the back of his neck, watched him force himself back into the emotionless control that kept him functional. This is what the curse does to you, she said. It kills your ability to feel anything. Yes. Cassian did not turn around. And if I fight it, the curse attacks harder. Emotion accelerates the deterioration, so I learned to feel nothing. It was the only way to slow the process. The brutal logic of it settled over the room like falling snow. He had chosen emptiness over death, survival over humanity, and it was destroying him one frozen heartbeat at a time. How long until you are completely gone? Aurelia asked. 5 years. Perhaps less. Cassian finally turned to face her. His expression was controlled again, empty again. Unless I find a way to break the curse, I will become exactly what my enemies claim I already am, a monster wearing a crown. Aurelia crossed her arms. And you think I can help you? I think your presence disrupts the curse in ways I do not understand. Cassian moved back toward the table. Which means you are either the solution or the catalyst that accelerates my destruction. I intend to find out which. He picked up a territorial map and studied it with the same focus he had given her moments ago. You will stay in the Citadel. You will accompany me to council meetings, military inspections, and diplomatic gatherings. I want to see if proximity maintains the effect or if it diminishes over time. You want to use me as an experiment. I want to use you as a weapon against the thing that has been killing my family for 3 centuries. Cassian looked at her over the edge of the map. If that offends you, you are welcome to leave. But understand that the moment you step outside Frostfang's protection, every enemy I have made in the past decade will hunt you down to use you against me. It was not a threat, just another fact delivered without emotion. Aurelia was trapped, protected prisoner or hunted exile. Those were her options. She chose the one that kept her alive. When is the first council meeting? She asked. Tomorrow. Cassian returned his attention to the map. Wear something that makes you look like you belong to me. The nobles will test you. I need them to believe you are untouchable. He dismissed her without another word. Aurelia walked back through corridors lined with frozen kings and dead queens and tried not to think about the fact that she had just agreed to become a weapon in a war against a curse that had been winning for 300 years. But her hand still felt warm where Cassian had touched it, and that warmth terrified her more than anything else in this frozen hell. Because if she could make the Ice King feel again, what would that cost her when the curse came to collect its debt? The council chamber reeked of old power and older grudges. Aurelia stood 3 paces behind Cassian's throne, while 20 territorial alphas filled the room with the kind of tension that preceded either treaties or bloodshed. The architecture itself seemed designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings that swallowed sound. Windows positioned to throw light across the throne while leaving everyone else in shadow. Banners from conquered territories hanging like hunting trophies above the assembly. She wore black silk that Cassian's servants had prepared. High collar, long sleeves. Nothing decorative except the silver clasp at her throat stamped with the Frostfang crest. The message was clear. She belonged to the crown now. Touching her meant challenging the king, but ownership was different than acceptance. Every alpha in that room looked at her like she was a problem waiting to detonate, some with open hostility, others with the calculating patience of predators deciding when to strike. None of them believed she belonged here. A half-blood witch daughter standing behind the Ice King during territorial negotiations was an insult to protocol and bloodline politics that had governed these councils for generations. Cassian sat motionless on his throne. He had not acknowledged her presence since they entered, had not looked at her or spoken to her or given any indication that he remembered she existed. Just sat with his hands resting on carved armrests and his gaze fixed on the assembled alphas with that same flat emptiness. Lord Malachar stood to the king's right. The senior advisor's expression revealed nothing but Aurelia had learned to read the micro-adjustments in his posture, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked movement around the room. He was worried, which meant this council was more dangerous than it appeared. The first alpha to speak was Lord Garrick Vexley, Dorian's father, the man who had orchestrated her public rejection 3 nights ago. He stood from his seat in the Eastern delegation and addressed the throne with the kind of formal respect that barely concealed contempt. Your Majesty, before we proceed with territorial matters, I believe the council deserves an explanation regarding your recent actions at Briarcliff Keep. Cassian did not respond immediately, just looked at Garrick with those frozen eyes. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Then it stretched further until discomfort transformed into something closer to fear. When Cassian finally spoke, his voice carried across the chamber without rising in volume. I do not recall requesting your belief. Garrick's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. You claimed a rejected half-blood during a sacred ceremony. This action undermines pack law and creates dangerous precedent. The Council has a right to understand your reasoning. Do you question my authority, Lord Vexley? The question landed like a blade against skin. Not quite cutting, not quite threatening, but close enough that everyone in the room understood what would happen if Garrick pushed further. The older alpha's hands curled into fists. I question the wisdom of elevating bloodline impurity to a position of influence within the crown. The Nightbane woman carries witch magic. Her mother was executed for practicing forbidden arts. Allowing her access to royal councils invites corruption into the very heart of my council. Cassian leaned forward slightly. The movement was minimal, but it shifted the entire energy in the room. My throne. My authority. If you take issue with my choices, you are welcome to challenge me directly, instead of hiding behind questions about bloodlines. No one moved. No one breathed. Challenging an Alpha King meant combat to the death. Garrick Vexley commanded significant military force, but he was 60 years old and Cassian had built his reputation by killing people who underestimated him. The math was not in Garrick's favor. The Eastern Alpha lowered his gaze first. As you say, Your Majesty. He sat down. The defeat was subtle but absolute. Aurelia watched the exchange and understood something fundamental about the Ice King's power. He did not rule through warmth or loyalty or any quality that required emotional connection. He ruled through the cold certainty that challenging him meant death, and that certainty was enough to keep kingdoms obedient even when they hated him. But empires built on fear eventually collapse beneath their own weight, because fear only works until someone decides dying is preferable to obeying. And Garrick Vexley looked like a man calculating exactly that equation. Another alpha stood. Younger, Eastern territories. His voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone trying not to take sides. Your Majesty, perhaps Lord Vexley's concerns could be addressed if Lady Nightbane were to undergo the traditional bloodline assessment, the old rituals. It would confirm whether her magic poses any threat to the crown and settle questions of legitimacy. Several alphas murmured agreement. Cassian tilted his head slightly. The gesture looked analytical rather than curious. And if she refuses? Then her presence here confirms she has something to hide. The young alpha spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. Surely, transparency serves everyone's interests. It was a trap wrapped in protocol. The bloodline assessment involved old magic that measured purity and identified corruption. But the ritual had been used historically to justify executions. Women accused of witchcraft were subjected to tests designed to prove guilt regardless of innocence. Survive the assessment and you were pure. Die during it, and your death confirmed the accusations. Either way, the problem disappeared. Aurelia felt 20 pairs of eyes shift toward her, waiting for her reaction, watching to see if fear would crack her composure. She stepped forward before Cassian could respond. The movement drew every gaze in the room. Lord Malachar's expression tightened. Cassian's eyes tracked her approach, but he did not stop her. Aurelia stopped beside the throne, close enough that proximity itself made a statement about her position. She looked at the young alpha who had suggested the assessment. You want to know if I am dangerous, she said. Her voice carried clearly without shouting. My mother was executed because she practiced healing magic that threatened the profits of nobles selling fraudulent remedies. She died because helping people was less profitable than exploiting them. If that makes me dangerous to this council, then yes, I am my mother's daughter. The chamber went silent. No one had expected her to speak. Claimed mates did not address counsel. They stood in silence and accepted whatever protection or condemnation their alpha provided. But Aurelia had spent 3 days learning the architecture of this frozen citadel. She understood that Cassian had claimed her not out of affection, but because she disrupted his curse, which meant her value was not obedience. It was effect. And silence had effects that words could not match. But so did defiance. She continued before anyone could interrupt. You call my bloodline impure. You claim witch magic corrupts everything it touches. But your kings have been cursed for 300 years, and none of your pure bloodlines have broken it. So perhaps purity is not the virtue you believe it is. Garrick Vexley stood abruptly. His chair scraped against stone. This is an outrage. She speaks treason in front of... Cassian raised one hand. The gesture was minimal, just fingers lifted from the armrest. But Garrick's voice died immediately. The Ice King stood from his throne. He moved with that same unhurried grace. When he reached Aurelia, he stopped close enough that anyone watching would understand the message. She was under his protection, and anyone who touched her would answer to him personally. Cassian looked at the assembled alphas. His expression remained empty, but something in his posture had shifted. Some micro-adjustment that Aurelia could not identify, but everyone in the room seemed to feel. "The bloodline assessment will not be necessary," he said. "Lady Nightbane serves the crown. Her magic is mine to command. If any of you take issue with that arrangement, step forward now." No one moved. Cassian let the silence stretch until discomfort transformed into something closer to surrender. Then he returned to his throne and continued the council as if nothing had happened. But Aurelia felt the shift in the room. The alphas stopped looking at her like she was weak, started looking at her like she might be the most dangerous person present, not because of her magic, but because the Ice King had just defended her in front of his entire council. And kings who defend things they claim to feel nothing about are either lying or losing control. Both options made her a threat. The council lasted 4 more hours. Aurelia stood behind Cassian's throne while territorial alphas argued about trade routes, military deployments, and border disputes that had festered for decades. She learned more about the Empire's structure in those 4 hours than she had in 3 days of isolation. Frostfang controlled the northern territories through a combination of military superiority and strategic marriages that bound lesser alphas to the crown. But those bonds were fragile, built on fear rather than loyalty. And fear only worked until someone decided they had nothing left to lose. Several alphas were close to that calculation. Lord Garrick Vexley kept glancing at her with barely concealed rage. The Eastern Alpha had lost face when Cassian shut down his challenge. That loss would fester. Men with Garrick's pride did not forgive public humiliation. Another Alpha from the Western Territories watched her with different energy, not rage, calculation. He was trying to figure out what she represented, whether she was weakness he could exploit or strength he needed to account for. Both assessments made her vulnerable. When the council finally ended, alphas filed out in clusters organized by alliance and territory. They did not acknowledge her, just left while discussing the day's proceedings in voices low enough to suggest conspiracy. Lord Malachar approached the throne once the chamber emptied. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "allowing Lady Nightbane to speak during council was unprecedented. The alphas will interpret that as... Well, I do not care what they interpret." Cassian stood from his throne. His expression had not changed throughout the entire council. Still flat, still empty. But frost had spread across his knuckles during the last hour, the curse attacking him for whatever emotion he had forced himself to suppress. Malachar noticed. His eyes tracked to Cassian's hands before returning to the king's face. "Your Majesty, perhaps you should rest. The curse seems more active than..." "I am fine." Cassian descended the throne steps. "Leave us." It was a dismissal that allowed no argument. Malachar bowed and left. But Aurelia saw the concern in his expression. The senior advisor knew something was wrong, could see the curse accelerating despite Cassian's control, or perhaps because of it. Once they were alone, Cassian walked to the windows that overlooked the frozen gardens. He stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid, hands curled into fists at his sides. Aurelia waited. She had learned that Cassian did not respond well to questions. He preferred silence until he decided to fill it. "You should not have spoken," he said finally. "You did not stop me. I wanted to see what would happen." Cassian turned to face her. His expression was still controlled, but something was different, some tension beneath the surface. "If the alphas believed I valued you, they would test that belief. I needed to know how you would respond under pressure. So I was bait. You were a variable I introduced into a controlled environment." He moved closer. "Now I have data." Aurelia crossed her arms. "What did you learn?" "That you do not break easily, that you understand power dynamics well enough to use them, that your presence affects me in ways I cannot fully control." The last admission seemed to cost him something. His jaw tightened. Frost spread further across his knuckles. Aurelia looked at his hands. The curse is getting worse. Yes. Cassian followed her gaze. Every time I feel anything, it accelerates. Anger, fear. Whatever happened when you spoke during council, all of it feeds the deterioration. What did you feel? Pride. The word came out flat, empty, like he was describing weather instead of emotion. You challenged the council and I felt proud of you. Then I felt rage at Garrick for trying to undermine you. Then fear that showing either emotion would reveal weakness. He said it clinically, like documenting symptoms of a disease. But the curse attacks you for feeling those things, Aurelia said. Yes. Which means I have a choice. Cassian held up his frosted hands. Feel nothing and slow the curse. Or feel everything and die faster. There is no middle ground. The brutal mathematics of it settled between them like falling snow. He had been choosing emptiness for years because emptiness kept him alive. But Aurelia disrupted that equation, made him feel things he had successfully buried, and every feeling accelerated his death, which meant keeping her close was suicide. And sending her away meant returning to the frozen half-life that was killing him anyway. Aurelia stepped closer. She reached for his hand before she could second-guess the impulse. The moment their skin touched, warmth flooded through her arm and into her chest. The frost on Cassian's knuckles melted instantly. Color returned to his face. His breathing deepened. For 5 seconds, he looked completely alive. Then he pulled away. But this time his hand was not shaking. This time he looked at her with something that might have been longing. What if there is another option? Aurelia asked. There is not. Cassian turned away. I have spent 15 years analyzing this curse. I have consulted healers, scholars, and witches from every territory. The conclusion is always the same. Emotion accelerates the deterioration. Control slows it. There is no cure. But what if the curse is not trying to kill you? Cassian went still. Explain. Aurelia thought about her mother, about magic that healed instead of harmed, about the way power worked when people understood it as something other than weapon. Curses are not random, she said. They are created with intention. Your ancestor did something that triggered this magic. What if the curse is not punishment? What if it is a test? That makes no difference. Cassian's voice remained flat. Test or punishment, the result is the same. Unless you are supposed to fail it. He turned to face her. The expression on his face was still controlled, but something shifted behind his eyes. Some spark of interest. Aurelia continued. You have been fighting emotion for 15 years because you believe feeling anything makes you weak. But what if that is exactly what the curse wants? What if it feeds on suppression? Then why does emotion accelerate it? Because you are fighting it. Aurelia stepped closer. Every time you feel something, you force it down. That internal war is what the curse attacks. Not the emotion itself, the suppression. Cassian stared at her. For 10 seconds, he did not respond. Then he laughed. It was the first genuine sound she had heard from him. Harsh, bitter, but real. You are suggesting I embrace emotion instead of controlling it, he said. You want the Ice King to feel everything and hope that somehow breaks a curse that has killed my family for 300 years. I am suggesting that control has not worked. Aurelia held his gaze. You have 5 years left. Maybe less. What do you have to lose by trying something different? Everything. Cassian's expression flattened again. If you are wrong, I die faster. And the Empire collapses into civil war because I gambled on hope instead of strategy. And if I am right, then I am a fool for not seeing it sooner. He moved past her toward the chamber doors. But hope is not data, and I do not make decisions based on variables I cannot measure. He left before she could respond. Aurelia stood alone in the empty council chamber and tried not to think about the fact that she had just told the most controlled man in the Empire to surrender control. But her hand still felt warm where he had touched her, and that warmth was starting to feel less like comfort and more like a countdown. 3 nights later, Cassian summoned her to the royal library. Aurelia found him surrounded by books older than the Empire itself, ancient texts stacked across tables, scrolls unfurled across the floor. He stood in the center of the organized chaos like a general studying battlefield maps. He did not look up when she entered. I have been researching the original curse, he said. His voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had not slept. Every text describes the same pattern. The first Draven king seduced a Night Vale witch, promised her marriage, used her magic to secure his throne, then abandoned her when political advantage required a different alliance. Aurelia moved closer. She recognized some of the texts. Her mother had owned copies before they were burned. The witch cursed every descendant who inherited his crown, Cassian continued. Specifically, the crown, not the bloodline. The curse activates when someone from Draven blood sits on the throne, so abdication would break it. Cassian looked at her for the first time since she entered. His eyes were bloodshot. Frost climbed his neck in thin, crystalline patterns. Abdication means civil war. The territories would tear themselves apart fighting over succession. Hundreds of thousands would die. He said it factually, without emotion. But Aurelia heard the weight beneath the words. Cassian Draven might be empty inside, but he still understood responsibility, still carried the burden of empire even as it crushed him. That was why the curse was winning, because good men destroy themselves trying to save everyone else. What if the witch did not want vengeance? Aurelia asked. She cursed my family for 300 years. Cassian returned his attention to the texts. That seems definitional of vengeance. Or grief. Aurelia picked up one of the scrolls. Read the original account. Your ancestor did not just abandon her. He married someone else 3 days after making blood promises to her. Had children with another woman while she lived in exile. Died surrounded by family while she died alone. Cassian went still. You think the curse is about loneliness. I think the curse is about betrayal. About a woman whose power was used and discarded. About love promised and destroyed. Aurelia set down the scroll. Your family has been trying to break this with control and strategy for 3 centuries, but you cannot strategize your way out of an emotional wound. Then what do you suggest? Stop trying to fight it. Aurelia moved closer. The curse attacks when you suppress emotion because suppression is what created it in the first place. The original king suppressed his feelings for the witch to pursue political advantage. That suppression became the curse's foundation. So I should feel everything and hope that somehow reverses 300 years of magic. Yes. Cassian stared at her. Then he turned away and braced both hands against the table. His shoulders rose and fell with breathing that was too shallow. I have built my entire life on control, he said quietly. I survived by feeling nothing, by making decisions without emotional compromise. You are asking me to destroy the only tool that has kept me alive. I am asking you to trust me. Aurelia stepped beside him. Your wolf woke when I refused to break. It responds when we touch. That means something. It means you are dangerous. Cassian's voice carried an edge she had not heard before. You make me feel things I cannot afford to feel. Every time you are near, the curse accelerates. If I let myself... He stopped, jaw clenched, frost spreading across his jawline. If you let yourself what? Aurelia pushed. Cassian turned to face her. For the first time since they met, his expression was not empty. It was raw. If I let myself care about you, the curse will kill me. He said it like a confession, like admitting weakness that could get him destroyed. I can already feel it happening. Every time you speak, every time you challenge me, every time you look at me like I am still human instead of the monster everyone knows I am becoming, then maybe you are supposed to die. Aurelia held his gaze. Maybe the curse can only break if you are willing to risk everything for something that matters more than survival. Nothing matters more than survival. Love does. The word landed between them like a blade. Cassian's expression cracked, just for a second. But Aurelia saw everything beneath the fracture. Fear, longing, desperation. The raw truth of a man who had been dying slowly for so long that he had forgotten what living felt like. Then the control slammed back into place. His face flattened. The frost spread further. Get out, he said. No. Aurelia. His voice carried warning. Leave before Before you what? She stepped closer. Before you feel something. Before the curse punishes you for being human. Before you admit that control is not strength, it is cowardice. She knew the words were cruel the moment they left her mouth. Knew she was pushing too hard. But sometimes the only way to break frozen things was to apply pressure until they shattered. Cassian's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. His eyes burned, the first real heat she had seen in them. You think I am a coward? His voice was low, dangerous. I have killed men for less. Then kill me. Aurelia did not pull away. Prove that feeling nothing makes you strong. For 5 seconds they stood frozen, his hand on her wrist, her gaze locked with his. Then Cassian kissed her. It was not gentle, not soft. It was the collision between 15 years of suppressed emotion and 3 days of proximity, between a king who had forgotten how to feel and a woman who refused to let him die empty. The curse screamed through the library. Books flew from shelves, scrolls ignited, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in 3 seconds. Frost exploded across every surface. But Cassian did not pull away. He kissed her like a man drowning, and she was air. Like she was the only thing standing between him and the frozen death that had been waiting 15 years to claim him. When they finally broke apart, the library looked like a battlefield, and Cassian was crying. Not because he was weak, but because powerful men often cry hardest when they finally stop pretending they are invincible. Aurelia touched his face. The tears were warm against her palm. The curse will kill you for this, she said quietly. I know. Cassian's voice was rough, raw. I do not care anymore. Then we fight it together. How? I do not know yet. Aurelia smiled despite everything, but we have 5 years to figure it out. Cassian almost smiled. It looked unpracticed, fragile, like something he had not done in so long he had forgotten the mechanics. Then the library doors exploded inward. Lord Malachar stood in the entrance with a dozen royal guards. His expression was grim. Your Majesty, he said, the Eastern Territories have mobilized. Lord Garrick Vexley has declared rebellion. The war room filled with generals and territorial commanders within the hour. Cassian stood behind the strategic table while military officers unrolled maps marked with troop movements and supply lines. His expression had returned to that familiar emptiness, but Aurelia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands rested too carefully on the table edge, like he was forcing them to stay still. Lord Malachar positioned markers across the Eastern Territories. Red stones for Vexley forces, black for Frostfang loyalists. The red outnumbered the black 3-1. Lord Garrick has mobilized 12,000 soldiers, Malachar said. He has secured alliance pledges from 6 minor houses in the eastern region. They are moving toward the Greythorn Pass. If they control that passage, they can cut off supply routes to the northern citadels. How long until they reach the pass? Cassian's voice was flat, clinical. 4 days. Maybe 3 if they force march. One of the generals leaned forward, a scarred veteran whose armor carried enough kill marks to prove he had survived battles that destroyed better men. Your Majesty, we have 8,000 soldiers garrisoned here, another 4,000 scattered across the northern territories. We can consolidate forces at the pass within 6 days if we mobilize immediately, which gives Vexley 3 days to fortify his position, another general countered. We would be attacking uphill against entrenched forces with superior numbers. The casualties would be catastrophic. The room descended into tactical arguments, generals debating deployment strategies and supply chain logistics and acceptable loss ratios. They spoke about thousands of deaths the way accountants discuss budget allocations. Aurelia stood against the wall where Cassian had positioned her when they entered, out of the way but visible, a reminder that she existed even if no one acknowledged her directly. She watched Cassian's face while generals argued, watched him process information with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had stopped feeling the weight of decisions that would kill people. This was what the curse had transformed him into, a strategic machine that calculated outcomes without emotional interference. And for 15 years, that transformation had kept the Empire stable. But empires built on emotionless efficiency eventually forget what they are supposed to protect. They become mechanisms of self-perpetuation where survival matters more than purpose. One of the younger generals turned to Cassian. Your Majesty, there is another option. The room went quiet. The general hesitated before continuing. We could negotiate. Lord Garrick is rebelling because he believes Lady Nightbane represents corruption within the crown. If we were to offer him assurances that her influence would be limited, or perhaps... No. Cassian's voice cut through the suggestion like a blade through silk. The general blinked. Your Majesty, I only meant to suggest that diplomatic solutions might preserve lives, that combat would— I said no. Cassian straightened from the table. Lady Nightbane is under crown protection. That protection is not negotiable. Any general who believes otherwise can join Lord Vexley in rebellion right now. The room went silent. No one moved, no one spoke. The message was clear. Challenging Aurelia meant challenging the king, and challenging the king meant death. But Aurelia heard something beneath Cassian's words that the generals missed. Something that sounded almost like desperation. Like a man trying to protect the one thing that made him feel human while his empire collapsed around him. And that desperation made him vulnerable in ways strategy never could. Malachar cleared his throat carefully. Your Majesty, perhaps we should discuss this privately before making final decisions. There is nothing to discuss. Cassian moved toward the chamber doors. Mobilize the northern garrison. Send riders to the western territories and demand they honor their treaty obligations. We march in 2 days. He left without waiting for confirmation. The generals exchanged glances. Then they began issuing orders with the efficient brutality of men preparing for war. Aurelia followed Cassian into the corridor before anyone could stop her. She caught up to him 3 hallways away from the war room. He was walking fast. Too fast. Like he was trying to outrun something that lived inside his own chest. Cassian, she called. He stopped but did not turn around. His shoulders were rigid. Frost climbed his neck in visible patterns. You cannot fight a war for me, Aurelia said. I am not fighting for you. His voice was tight, controlled. I am defending crown authority against territorial rebellion. This is strategy, not emotion. You are lying. Cassian turned to face her. His expression was still controlled, but something lived behind his eyes now. Something that looked like fear. If I allow Vexley to dictate who stands beside the throne, every alpha in the Empire will test that weakness. The rebellion will spread, the kingdom will fracture, thousands will die. He spoke like he was trying to convince himself. This is about political stability, nothing else. Aurelia stepped closer. You kissed me an hour ago. You cried. You felt something real for the first time in 15 years. And now you are willing to march 12,000 soldiers into battle to protect what we just started to build. What we started to build will get me killed. Cassian's control cracked slightly. The curse is accelerating. I can feel it eating through my chest every time I look at you, every time I allow myself to care whether you live or die. This is suicide wrapped in sentiment, and I am still choosing it. Then stop choosing it. Aurelia held his gaze. Let me go. Send me away. Tell Vexley I mean nothing to you and end this before it destroys everything. I cannot. The admission came out raw, broken. I tried. For 3 days I tried to convince myself you were just a variable to study, just a tool to slow the curse. But you are not. You are— He stopped, jaw clenched, frost spreading across his face like living ice. I am what? Aurelia pushed. You are the first thing I have wanted to protect in 15 years. Cassian's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Not because strategy demands it, not because Empire requires it, because the thought of losing you makes me feel like I am dying faster than the curse ever could. The honesty of it landed like a physical blow. Aurelia reached for his hand. The moment their skin touched, warmth flooded between them. The frost melted, color returned to his face, but his hand was shaking. We will fight this together, she said quietly. The curse, the rebellion, all of it. Cassian pulled away gently. His expression flattened again. Control reasserting itself. Go back to your chambers, he said. Lock the doors. Do not leave until I send for you. Why? Because I'm about to make decisions that will get people killed. Cassian turned away from her. And I do not want you to see what I become when I stop pretending to be human. He walked away before she could respond. Aurelia stood alone in the corridor and tried not to think about the fact that she had just watched the Ice King choose war over surrender, and that choice was going to cost more than either of them understood. But Aurelia did not go to her chambers. Instead, she went to the royal library, the same room where Cassian had kissed her, where books still lay scattered across the floor from the curse's violent reaction. She needed to understand the original curse, needed to find something the scholars had missed, Because going to war would not break magic that had survived 3 centuries of tactical genius trying to destroy it. She spent hours reading through ancient texts, accounts of the original betrayal written by witnesses who had watched the first Draven king abandon the Night Vale witch, letters between the witch and the king before he destroyed everything they had built together. One letter stopped her cold. It was written in the witch's hand. The ink had faded to brown, but the words were still legible. You promised me a throne beside yours. You promised our children would unite bloodlines that had warred for generations. You promised love that would outlast kingdoms. But promises mean nothing to men who value power more than truth. So I give you this gift. Every king who wears your crown will lose the capacity for love piece by piece until nothing remains except the emptiness you showed me. And that curse will only break when a Draven king chooses love over power. When he risks everything for something that cannot be measured in territory or strength. Only then will my grief release your bloodline. Aurelia read it 3 times. The curse was not designed to kill. It was designed to teach, to force Draven kings to confront the same choice their ancestor had failed. Love or power, emotion or control, risk or safety. And for 300 years, every king had chosen power, because powerful men survive longer than vulnerable ones. Because control keeps empires stable. Because love was a luxury that got kings killed. But Cassian was different. He had already chosen her over political stability, had defended her in front of his council, had kissed her despite knowing the curse would accelerate, had declared war rather than negotiate away the one thing that made him feel human. He was choosing love, which meant he was already doing what the curse demanded. But the curse was still attacking him. Aurelia stared at the letter and tried to understand what she was missing, some piece of the equation that did not fit the pattern. Then she saw it. The curse would only break when a Draven king chose love over power. Not just chose love, but chose it over power, which meant he had to surrender the thing that defined him. Cassian had to give up the throne. The realization hit like cold water. Abdication was the only answer, the only choice that proved love mattered more than empire. But Cassian had already told her that abdication meant civil war, that hundreds of thousands would die fighting over succession. So the curse was designed to create an impossible choice: break the empire to save himself, or sacrifice himself to save the empire. Either way, he lost. Aurelia was still processing that brutal mathematics when footsteps echoed in the library entrance. She turned, expecting to see Cassian. Instead, Lord Malachar stood in the doorway. The senior advisor looked older in the firelight, tired, like he carried weight that had been accumulating for decades. "Lady Nightbane," he said carefully, "you should not be here. I needed to understand the curse." Malachar walked further into the library. He glanced at the scattered texts and the letter she still held. "You found the original correspondence," he observed. "Yes." Aurelia set the letter down. "The curse requires abdication. Cassian has to give up the throne to break it." "I know." Malachar's expression was grim. "I have known for 30 years. The admission hung in the air like poison." Aurelia went very still. "You knew, and you never told him." Malachar moved to the table. He picked up one of the ancient texts and studied it with the familiarity of someone who had read it many times before. "I served King Aldrich, Cassian's father. He studied this curse for decades, trying to find a solution that did not require destroying the empire. He eventually concluded that abdication was impossible, that the cost was too high, so he chose to die instead. He chose to protect the kingdom." Malachar set down the text. King Aldrich understood that rulers do not have the luxury of choosing personal happiness over collective stability. He died hoping his son would find another way. But there is no other way. Aurelia stepped closer. The curse is designed to force this exact choice: love or power, Cassian or the empire. "Yes," Malachar met her gaze, "which is why I cannot allow you to tell him." The words landed like a blade. Aurelia felt the shift in the room, felt danger crystallizing around her like ice forming on water. "What are you saying?" she asked carefully. "I am saying that King Cassian is the most effective ruler Frostfang has seen in a century. His strategic genius has prevented 3 civil wars. His military leadership has secured borders that were collapsing under his father's rule. He governs without emotional compromise, and that emotionlessness has kept this empire stable. He is dying. We are all dying. Malakar's voice hardened. The question is whether we die serving something larger than ourselves, or whether we prioritize individual survival over collective good. You want him to stay cursed. Aurelia understood now, understood the calculation behind Malakar's eyes. You prefer a king who feels nothing because emotionless kings are easier to manage. I prefer a king who makes decisions based on logic rather than sentiment. Malakar crossed his arms. Emotion makes rulers unpredictable. Unpredictable rulers create instability, and instability gets kingdoms destroyed. So you have been protecting the curse for decades. I have been protecting the empire. There is a difference. Aurelia felt rage building in her chest. You watched his father die. You are watching him die. And you are doing nothing because a frozen king serves your political interests better than a human one. My political interests are irrelevant. Malakar stepped closer. I have dedicated my life to serving this crown. I have made sacrifices you cannot comprehend to keep this kingdom intact, and I will not allow one woman with witch blood to destroy everything I have built just because she believes love conquers strategy. The threat was clear now, explicit. Aurelia had two choices: stay silent and let Cassian die slowly, or tell him the truth and face whatever Malakar was planning. Before she could respond, Malakar pulled a small vial from his robes. This is blackthorn extract, he said calmly. Tasteless, odorless. It mimics natural causes within hours. You will appear to die from a weak heart, a tragic loss. But King Cassian will recover from your death eventually, and the Empire will survive. You are going to kill me. Only if you force me to choose between your life and the stability of thousands. Malakar's expression did not change. I do not take pleasure in this, but I am very good at making difficult decisions. Aurelia looked at the vial, then at Malakar, then at the library doors that suddenly seemed very far away. Understanding settled over her like falling snow. This was the real betrayal. Not Dorian's rejection, not the council's hostility. This, the trusted advisor who had served the crown for decades, was willing to murder her to protect an empire built on frozen kings and strategic brutality. And no one would question it. A half-blood witch dying mysteriously inside Frostfang Citadel would be seen as inevitable, expected, maybe even deserved. She had walked into a trap she never saw coming. Because the most dangerous enemies are not the ones who declare war openly. They are the ones who smile beside you while calculating exactly when to strike. Malakar took a step closer. I will give you until dawn to decide. Tell King Cassian the truth about the curse, and I will ensure you never see sunrise. Stay silent, and you will live under crown protection for as long as the king survives. He set the vial on the table between them. Choose wisely, Lady Nightbane. Then he walked out of the library and left Aurelia alone with impossible mathematics. Aurelia did not sleep that night. She paced her chambers while dawn approached, and the decision Malakar had forced upon her grew heavier with every passing hour. Tell Cassian the truth and die. Stay silent and watch him die slowly over the next 5 years. Both options felt like different versions of the same surrender. She thought about her mother, about the witch who had been executed for practicing magic that helped people. Her mother had chosen truth over safety, had chosen to heal the sick even when it made her dangerous to nobles profiting from fraudulent remedies, and she had died for that choice. But she had died standing, defiant, refusing to compromise the thing that made her human. Aurelia looked out the window at dawn breaking over Frostfang Citadel. The black towers caught first light and transformed into something almost beautiful. She made her decision. When Cassian summoned her to the war room an hour later, she went prepared for what came next. The king stood surrounded by generals finalizing deployment orders. He looked exhausted. Frost climbed his neck and jaw in visible patterns. The curse was attacking harder now, accelerating because he had allowed himself to feel something real. His eyes found hers across the room. For just a second, warmth flickered in that gaze. Then he returned his attention to the military briefings. Aurelia waited until the generals finished their reports and filed out, until only Cassian and Malakar remained in the chamber. Then she spoke before she could second-guess the words. I know how to break the curse. Cassian went very still. Malakar's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Explain, Cassian said. Aurelia pulled the witch's letter from her robes, the original correspondence she had found in the library. She set it on the table in front of him. The curse breaks when a Draven king chooses love over power. Not just chooses love, but proves love matters more by surrendering the thing that defines him. You have to abdicate the throne. Cassian read the letter. His expression remained controlled, but his hands tightened on the paper edges. Abdication means civil war, he said quietly. I know. Thousands will die. I know. And you still think I should do it. Aurelia met his gaze. I think you deserve to live as something other than a frozen weapon. I think 300 years of cursed kings is enough. I think empires that require rulers to sacrifice their humanity are empires that do not deserve to survive. The room went silent. Malachar finally spoke. Your Majesty, Lady Nightbane does not understand the complexities of... She understands perfectly. Cassian cut him off. His voice was still flat, but something had changed in his posture. She understands that I have been choosing empire over humanity for 15 years, and she is telling me to stop. He set down the letter and looked at Malachar. How long have you known about this? The senior advisor's expression tightened. Your Majesty, How long? 30 years, Malachar admitted. Since your father ruled, he chose not to abdicate. He believed the cost was too high. And you agreed with him? Yes. Malachar straightened. I still agree. Abdicating the throne will destroy everything we have built. The territories will fracture, warlords will seize power, hundreds of thousands will die in the resulting chaos. One man's life is not worth that cost, even if that one man is your king, especially if he is my king. Malachar's voice hardened. Rulers exist to serve their people, not the other way around. Your father understood that. I had hoped you would as well. Cassian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge Aurelia had not heard before. My father died screaming. I heard him through the walls. The curse consumed him piece by piece until nothing remained except pain and ice. And you watched it happen because you believed his suffering served a larger purpose. His suffering prevented civil war. No. Cassian stepped around the table. His suffering delayed civil war, because eventually every cursed king dies and the succession crisis happens anyway. You did not prevent anything. You just guaranteed my father died in agony so you could postpone the inevitable. Your Majesty, get out. The command was quiet, flat, but absolute. Malachar stared at him. Then he bowed stiffly and left the war room. Aurelia and Cassian stood alone in the silence that followed. The king braced both hands on the table. His shoulders rose and fell with breathing that was too shallow. Frost spread across his knuckles. I cannot abdicate, he said finally. I cannot trade hundreds of thousands of lives for my own. Then you will die. Aurelia kept her voice steady. In 5 years, maybe less, and the succession crisis will happen anyway, except you will not be alive to manage it. Cassian looked at her, really looked, like he was trying to memorize her face. If I abdicate, civil war starts immediately. I have no heir, no clear successor. The territories will tear themselves apart. Then name a successor, someone strong enough to hold the empire together. There is no one. Cassian's voice was bleak. Every potential candidate would be challenged by rivals. The fighting would last decades. Aurelia moved closer. What if you did not abdicate to no one? What if you chose someone the territories could not challenge? Who? Me. The word hung in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Cassian stared at her. You. I am your claimed mate. Aurelia spoke quickly, pushing through the idea before he could dismiss it. The bond is already established. If you formally name me as your successor and abdicate to me, the territories cannot challenge without challenging you directly. And no one will risk open war with the Ice King while you are still alive to fight it. You are a half-blood with no political training and a bloodline everyone fears, which makes me impossible to manipulate. Aurelia held his gaze. Malachar has been managing cursed kings for 30 years because emotion made them controllable. But I am not cursed. I am not frozen. And I will not let advisors dictate policy while pretending I rule. Cassian was quiet, processing, calculating. Then he spoke words that changed everything. If I do this, you understand what it means. You would become Alpha Queen of Frostfang. Every enemy I have made would become your enemy. Every decision I have postponed would fall to you. You would rule an empire built on fear and control and political brutality. Yes. And you think you can survive that? No. Aurelia stepped closer. But I think I can change it. I think an empire that requires frozen kings to function is an empire worth breaking, and I would rather die trying to build something better than watch you disappear piece by piece into the thing that killed your father. Cassian looked at her with something that might have been hope. Fragile. Unpracticed. Like he had forgotten what it felt like. Then frost exploded across his face and he collapsed. Aurelia caught him before he hit the floor. His body was freezing. Ice crystallized across his skin. His breathing stopped. The curse was killing him. Right now, in her arms, because he had allowed himself to hope. Aurelia pressed her hands to his chest and felt magic ignite inside her. The same power her mother had wielded. The witch blood everyone feared. Golden fire poured from her palms into his frozen heart. The curse screamed. Ice shattered. Warmth flooded back into Cassian's body. His eyes opened. He gasped breath like a drowning man breaking surface. They stared at each other on the war room floor while magic crackled between them like living lightning. How? Cassian's voice was raw. I do not know. Aurelia felt the power still burning in her veins. But the curse is attacking you for feeling hope, which means we are doing something right, or something that will kill us both, probably both. Despite everything, Cassian almost smiled. You are insane, and you are dying. Aurelia helped him sit up. So we match. Cassian steadied himself against her. Then he stood and offered his hand. If we do this, he said quietly, there is no going back. The moment I abdicate, everything changes. The empire, the territories, us. I know, and you still want to try. Aurelia took his hand. Yes. Cassian pulled her to her feet, then he kissed her. Not desperately this time, deliberately, like sealing a promise that would cost them everything. When they broke apart, his expression had changed. No longer empty, no longer controlled, alive. Then we break 300 years of tradition, he said, and hope we survive what comes next. Aurelia nodded. But first we need to deal with Malachar. Cassian's expression hardened. He already tried to kill you, did he not? It was not a question. Aurelia told him about the library, about the blackthorn extract, about the choice Malachar had given her. By the time she finished, frost had spread across Cassian's jaw again. But this time it was not the curse attacking. It was rage contained barely beneath frozen control. He will answer for that, Cassian said quietly. But first we end the rebellion. Then we deal with traitors inside our own walls. He moved toward the war room doors. Aurelia followed, and tried not to think about the fact that they had just declared war on the curse, the Eastern territories, and the senior advisor who had spent 30 years protecting the empire by sacrificing its kings. They were fighting battles on 3 fronts now, and losing even one would destroy everything they were trying to build. The northern garrison mobilized at dawn. Cassian stood in the armory while soldiers strapped armor across his chest and shoulders, black steel plates etched with kill marks from a decade of conquest, silver chainmail underneath that caught torchlight and transformed him into something between warrior and weapon. The servants worked in silence with the practiced efficiency of people who had dressed kings for war before. Aurelia watched from the doorway. She had not left his side since the war room, had not slept, just stood guard while he planned troop movements and supply routes with generals who looked at him differently now. Because something had changed in the Ice King overnight. His expression was still controlled, still strategic, but warmth lived behind his eyes now, something that looked almost human, and that humanity made him more dangerous than emptiness ever had. Because men who feel nothing make calculated decisions. But men who feel everything while still maintaining control become unpredictable in ways that terrify enemies and allies alike. One of the generals approached, scarred veteran whose armor told stories about survival through battles that destroyed better men. Your Majesty, the forces are assembled, 8,000 soldiers ready to march. We can reach Greythorn Pass in 4 days if weather holds. Cassian nodded. He turned to face Aurelia while servants finished securing armor straps. You will remain at the citadel, he said. The fortress is impenetrable. Malachar cannot touch you here. I am coming with you. The statement landed in the armory like a stone through glass. Every servant stopped working. The general's eyes widened slightly. Cassian went very still. No. Yes. Aurelia stepped into the armory. You are marching 8,000 soldiers into battle against superior numbers. The curse is accelerating because you are allowing yourself to feel, which means you will be fighting enemies on two fronts, the rebellion and the magic trying to kill you. You need me there. You will die. Probably. Aurelia held his gaze. But if you die on that battlefield, the curse wins. 300 years of suffering continues, and I refuse to let that happen because I stayed safe while you fought alone. Cassian stared at her, processing, calculating. Then he spoke quietly. If you come, you fight. I will not assign soldiers to protect you. Every man I pull from combat formation increases casualties elsewhere. I understand. You have no military training, no combat experience. You will be a liability. Then train me fast. Cassian almost smiled. The expression looked unpracticed but real. You are still insane, and you are still dying. Aurelia stepped closer. So we match. The general cleared his throat carefully. Your Majesty, perhaps Lady Nightbane could remain with the medical corps, behind the front lines. It would allow her proximity without direct combat exposure. No. Cassian's voice was flat. If she comes, she stands where I stand. I will not hide her behind soldiers while I ask them to die for territory and strategy. He turned to Aurelia. The medical corps travels with healing supplies and battlefield surgeons. You have witch blood. Can you channel that into healing magic? Aurelia thought about her mother, about magic used to mend broken bodies instead of breaking them, about power that served instead of destroyed. I can try. Trying gets people killed. Cassian's expression hardened. Either you can heal or you cannot. There is no middle ground in war. Then, yes. Aurelia straightened. I can heal. She had no idea if that was true, but truth was a luxury neither of them could afford anymore. Cassian studied her for 3 seconds. Then he nodded to the general. Assign her to the medical corps. Give her supplies and battlefield protocols. If she survives the march to Greythorn Pass, we will see if her magic is worth the risk. The general bowed and left to issue orders. Servants finished securing Cassian's armor. When they stepped back, the Ice King looked like war incarnate. Black steel and silver weapons and frost climbing his neck in visible patterns. But his eyes were warm when they found hers. If we die out there, he said quietly, I want you to know that you gave me something I thought was gone forever. What? A reason to fight for something other than duty. Cassian touched her face. The gesture was gentle, unpracticed, like he was still learning how to express affection without strategic purpose behind it. Then he pulled away and walked toward the armory doors where 8,000 soldiers waited to march into hell. Aurelia followed, and tried not to think about the fact that she had just committed to fighting a war she had no training for. But courage was not the absence of fear. It was choosing to act despite terror eating through your chest like acid. And if the Ice King could march toward his own death while the curse consumed him piece by piece, then she could stand beside him and pretend she knew what she was doing, even if that pretense got them both killed. Bike. The march to Greythorn Pass took 3 days. Aurelia rode with the medical corps near the center of the column. Healers and battlefield surgeons who moved with the grim efficiency of people who had spent years patching soldiers back together just to watch them die in the next engagement. They taught her protocols while the army marched, how to triage wounded, how to identify injuries worth treating versus injuries that meant inevitable death, how to keep working when blood covered everything and screams filled the air and exhaustion made your hands shake so badly you could barely hold instruments. It was brutal education delivered without sentiment or comfort. One of the senior healers was a woman named Kira, 50 years old with scars across her hands from battlefield amputations performed under combat conditions. She spoke in clipped sentences that wasted no words. Witch blood makes you valuable, Kira said while showing Aurelia how to pack arterial wounds. But magic does not stop you from freezing when men are dying in front of you. Can you handle that? Aurelia thought about watching her mother burn, about 300 wolves gathered to witness her humiliation. About standing in front of Cassian's council while alphas debated her right to exist. Yes, we will see. Kira returned her attention to medical supplies. First battle separates people who can handle blood from people who thought they could. No shame in breaking. But break quietly or you get other people killed. The conversation ended there. That night they camped in foothills overlooking the eastern territories. Aurelia sat near a campfire while soldiers prepared weapons and armor for combat that would arrive too soon. Cassian found her an hour before midnight. He sat beside her without speaking, just stared into flames like he was reading tactical data in the firelight. Frost climbed his jaw in thin, crystalline patterns. The curse was attacking harder now, accelerating because he was allowing himself to feel fear and hope and whatever else lived beneath the strategic control he maintained in front of his army. "How bad is it?" Aurelia asked quietly. Cassian glanced at her. Then he pulled off one glove. His hand was covered in ice, not frost. Actual ice that had crystallized across skin and climbed between fingers like living sculpture. "It spreads when I sleep," he said. "I wake up frozen from the inside out. It takes an hour to thaw enough to move properly." Aurelia reached for his hand. The moment their skin touched, warmth flooded between them. The ice melted instantly. Steam rose in the cold night air. Cassian stared at his hand, then at her. "You are the only thing keeping me functional," he said. "If you die tomorrow, the curse will consume me within hours. Then I will not die. You cannot promise that. Watch me." Despite everything, Cassian almost smiled. "You have no idea what combat looks like, what it sounds like, what it smells like when men are dying and blood is everywhere and nothing makes sense except survival." "Then tell me." Cassian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and remembered all of it. "War is not glory or honor or any of the things songs claim. It is chaos and terror and making decisions in seconds that get people killed. You will see men you ate breakfast with die screaming. You will smell burning flesh and realize it is someone you spoke to an hour before. You will make mistakes that cost lives, and you will have to keep working anyway because stopping means more people die." He looked at her directly. "And when it is over, if you survive, you will never be the same person who walked onto that battlefield. War takes pieces of you that never grow back." "Good." Aurelia held his gaze. "Because the person I was before would have begged Dorian to take me back, would have accepted humiliation because survival seemed more important than dignity. But I am not that person anymore. And I would rather die standing beside you than live safe while you fight alone." Cassian reached for her hand, held it without speaking. They sat like that while the campfire burned down and soldiers settled into uneasy sleep around them. Tomorrow, they would reach Greythorn Pass. Tomorrow, the war would start. Tomorrow, everything they had built in the past week would be tested by violence neither of them could fully control. But tonight they had this moment, this quiet, this warmth between frozen things. And sometimes moments like this were all warriors got before battles that would either destroy them or transform them into something capable of surviving hell. Greythorn Pass appeared on the fourth morning like a wound carved into the mountains. Narrow passage between cliff faces that rose 300 feet on either side. The only route from eastern territories to northern citadels that could accommodate supply caravans and troop movements. Controlling the pass meant controlling trade and military access for 6 territories. Lord Garrick Vexley had fortified it overnight. Cassian stood on a ridge overlooking the pass while scouts delivered reconnaissance reports. 12,000 enemy soldiers entrenched across the high ground, archers positioned on cliff edges, pike formations blocking the passage itself, supply lines secured from eastern strongholds. It was a defensive position designed to bleed attackers until superior numbers became irrelevant. The general who had survived too many battles stood beside the king. His expression was grim. "We cannot take that position without catastrophic losses," he said. "Even if we win, we would lose half our force. Then we do not take it directly." Cassian studied the terrain with the focused intensity of someone reading tactical data invisible to everyone else. "We divide their attention, force them to defend multiple fronts simultaneously." "How?" Cassian pointed to cliff faces on the southern edge. "Small team climbs at night, gets behind their archer positions, creates chaos. When they respond, we push the main force through the pass while they are disorganized." The general frowned. That climb is nearly vertical. We would need specialists, and even if they make it, they would be outnumbered 50 to 1. Then they hold long enough for the main force to break through. Cassian lowered his hand. I need volunteers. Your Majesty, sending men on a suicide mission to... It is not a suicide mission if I lead it personally. The statement landed like thunder. The general went pale. Your Majesty, you cannot. If you die, the entire command structure collapses. Then ensure I do not die. Cassian turned away from the ridge. Assemble 20 volunteers, climbers with combat experience. We move at midnight. He walked back toward the camp before anyone could argue. Aurelia intercepted him before he reached the command tent. You are climbing those cliffs, she said. It was not a question. Yes. That is suicide. That is strategy. Cassian kept walking. Vexley expects me to value my life more than victory. He has positioned his entire defense around that assumption, so I prove him wrong by dying on a cliff face, by disrupting his defensive formation long enough for 8,000 soldiers to break through. Cassian stopped and faced her. This is war. People die. The question is whether their deaths accomplish objectives or waste lives for nothing. And your death accomplishes what exactly? It proves I am willing to risk everything for something that matters. His expression was controlled, but something lived behind those eyes now. For 15 years, I made decisions without emotional investment. Every choice was calculated, every risk measured. But you changed that. You made me care about something other than strategy. So now I fight for a reason instead of just survival. You fight for me. I fight for us. Cassian touched her face. For the possibility that breaking this curse means something larger than individual survival. For the chance that empires can change when rulers refuse to sacrifice humanity for power. The honesty of it struck like physical force. Aurelia grabbed his armor and pulled him close. When she kissed him, it was desperate, terrified, like trying to memorize the taste of something about to disappear forever. When they broke apart, Cassian was breathing hard. Frost had spread across his jaw, but his eyes were warm. If you die on that cliff, Aurelia said quietly, I will find a way to bring you back just so I can kill you myself for being an idiot. Despite everything, Cassian smiled, noted. Then he walked toward the command tent to prepare for a mission that would either break the rebellion or end the Ice King permanently. Midnight arrived too fast. Aurelia stood with the medical corps while 20 volunteers assembled near the base of the southern cliffs. Climbers and scouts who understood they were about to attempt something with minimal survival probability. Cassian addressed them briefly. His voice carried across the darkness without rising. We climb in silence. No light. No sound. When we reach the top, we hit their archer positions hard and fast. Create enough chaos that the main force can push through below. Hold as long as possible. If you survive, withdraw to secondary positions and wait for extraction. One of the volunteers spoke. And if we do not survive, then you die knowing you gave 8,000 men a chance to break through. Cassian's expression was empty now. Cold. The Ice King fully present. There is no glory here, no songs, just tactical necessity. Anyone who wants to withdraw can do so now without consequence. No one moved. Cassian nodded. Then we climb. He started up the cliff face without waiting. The volunteers followed, 20 shadows disappearing into darkness 300 feet above the valley floor. Aurelia watched until she could not see them anymore. Then she returned to the medical course and started preparing for casualties that would arrive too soon. Kira worked beside her. The scarred healer's hands moved with practiced efficiency while setting up surgical stations and organizing supplies. Your king is either brilliant or suicidal, Kira said. Possibly both. Both, Aurelia confirmed. You love him. It was not a question. Aurelia kept working. Yes, love makes people stupid in war. Kira packed arterial clamps into field kits, makes them take risks that get everyone killed. Can you stay functional if he dies? No. Aurelia met her gaze. But I will keep working anyway. Kira studied her for 3 seconds, then nodded. Good enough. They finished preparations while stars wheeled overhead, and the army waited for a signal that would either start the battle or confirm the king had died attempting impossible odds. 2 hours before dawn, fire erupted on the southern cliffs. Screams echoed across the pass. Archer positions exploded into chaos. Enemy soldiers scrambled to respond to attackers who had appeared behind their defensive lines. The general commanding Cassian's forces saw the signal and gave the order. 8,000 soldiers surged toward Greythorn Pass, while enemy forces were divided and disorganized. The battle started with the sound of steel meeting flesh and men dying before they understood what killed them. Aurelia heard it from the medical station, heard the screams and the clash of weapons and the terrible sound of bodies hitting stone. Then the wounded started arriving. They came in waves, soldiers carried by comrades, men stumbling on their own, bodies that stopped moving before healers could reach them. Aurelia stopped thinking, just worked. Tourniquet on an arterial bleed, pack the wound. Move to the next patient. Broken leg that needed splinting. Stabilize. Move. Gut wound that meant inevitable death. Comfort them. Move. Her hands moved faster than her mind could process. Magic ignited without conscious intention. Golden fire that sealed wounds and stopped bleeding and did things she had no training for but somehow knew instinctively. Kira worked beside her. The scarred healer never stopped moving, never hesitated, just kept soldiers alive long enough to give them a chance. How long the battle lasted, Aurelia could not say. Time became irrelevant. Just the next patient, the next wound, the next decision about who lived and who died. Then someone grabbed her shoulder. She turned expecting another wounded soldier. Instead, she found the general. His armor was covered in blood. His expression was grim. "The king is down," he said. The world stopped. Aurelia felt her heart stutter, felt magic die in her hands, felt everything she had been fighting for collapse into the single word down. "Where?" Her voice came out steady despite the terror eating through her chest. "Southern Cliffs." He held the position for an hour, gave us time to break through, but he took an arrow. High chest. The volunteers are carrying him down now. Is he alive? Barely. Aurelia did not remember running, did not remember pushing through soldiers or scrambling up rocky terrain toward the southern cliffs. She just ran, and found Cassian surrounded by 4 surviving volunteers at the base of the cliff face. He was conscious, barely. Arrow embedded in his chest just below the collarbone. Blood everywhere. Frost spreading across his entire torso as the curse accelerated toward final consumption. His eyes found hers, tried to focus. "Told you," he whispered. "War takes pieces. Shut up." Aurelia dropped beside him, her hands ignited with golden fire. Magic poured from her palms into his chest around the arrow shaft. The curse fought back. Ice crystallized faster, spreading toward his heart. She pushed harder. More magic, more fire. Everything she had. "The arrow needs to come out," one of the volunteers said, "but if we pull it, he bleeds out in seconds. Then we seal the wound as we remove it." Aurelia looked at Kira, who had followed her up the slope. "Can you do that?" The scarred healer assessed the injury with clinical precision. "Maybe. If your magic can cauterize faster than he bleeds, it will hurt. He is already dying." Aurelia kept her hands pressed to Cassian's chest. "Hurt is irrelevant." Kira nodded. She positioned herself beside the arrow, gripped the shaft with both hands. "On 3, she said. 1. Cassian's hand found Aurelia's, squeezed weakly. 2. "I am sorry," he whispered. "Should have been more careful." 3. Kira pulled. The arrow came free with a sound Aurelia would hear in nightmares for the rest of her life. Blood erupted from the wound. Cassian screamed, a raw sound that had nothing to do with strategy or control. Aurelia's magic ignited with everything she had. Golden fire poured into the wound, cauterizing, sealing, fighting the curse that was trying to freeze his heart, while blood loss tried to kill him from the outside. For 10 seconds she held nothing back, let magic consume her completely. Then the bleeding stopped. The frost receded. Cassian's breathing steadied into something that resembled normal. Aurelia collapsed beside him, exhausted, shaking. Her hands were covered in his blood and her magic was burned to nothing. But he was alive. Kira checked his pulse, examined the sealed wound with professional assessment. "He will survive," she said, "if infection does not set in, if the curse does not accelerate, if a dozen other things do not go wrong." She stood and looked at Aurelia. "You just performed battlefield surgery that should have required 3 trained healers and a fully equipped medical station. Whatever witch blood you carry, it is powerful enough to rewrite probability." Then she walked away to treat other wounded soldiers. The general approached. His expression was cautious. "Your Majesty, the pass is ours. Vexley's forces are retreating. We won." Cassian tried to sit up. Failed. Casualties? 2,000 dead. Another 1,000 wounded. But we broke their defensive line. The rebellion is collapsing. And Vexley? Escaped. The general's jaw tightened. He fled when the line broke, headed back toward eastern strongholds. Then this is not over. Cassian's voice was weak but steady. He will regroup. Gather more forces. We need to pursue while he is disorganized. Your Majesty, you just survived an arrow to the chest. I need to end this before more soldiers die for territory and pride. Cassian forced himself upright despite Aurelia trying to stop him. How many men can march immediately? The general hesitated. Perhaps 4,000. The rest need time to recover or treat wounds. Take them. Pursue Vexley. Do not let him fortify another position. Cassian met the general's gaze. I am placing you in field command. End this rebellion before it costs more lives. The general bowed. As you command. He left to organize the pursuit. Aurelia helped Cassian lean against the cliff face. His breathing was still shallow. Frost climbed his neck despite the wound being sealed. You almost died, she said. Almost only matters in strategy. Cassian touched her face with a hand that shook slightly. You saved me. Again. We saved each other. Aurelia held his hand against her cheek. That is what this is now, partnership, not possession. Despite the pain and exhaustion and Frost consuming him piece by piece, Cassian smiled. You really are insane. And you really are dying, so we still match. They sat together while dawn broke over Greythorn Pass, and survivors counted the cost of victory measured in bodies and blood and strategic territory purchased with lives that would never return home. This was the reality of war that songs never captured. Not glory, not honor. Just brutal mathematics where winning meant fewer dead than losing, but dead nonetheless. And somewhere in the eastern territories, Lord Garrick Vexley was regrouping, planning, preparing for the next engagement. Because rebellions did not end with single battles. They ended when one side ran out of will or resources, or soldiers willing to die for causes that mattered less than survival. Cassian knew this, had fought enough wars to understand that Greythorn Pass was victory but not conclusion. But for now, they had this moment, this dawn, this breath. And sometimes moments were all warriors got before the next battle arrived to test whether they had learned anything from surviving the last one. Aurelia felt Cassian's pulse beneath her hand. Steady, strong, alive despite the curse and the arrow and the magic that should have killed him 3 times over. They had bought time, broken the rebellion's momentum, given themselves space to figure out the next move. But time was the most expensive resource in war, and the curse was still counting down toward inevitable consumption, which meant they needed to act fast. Before Cassian's 5 years became 5 months, before the Empire collapsed into chaos that no amount of strategy could prevent, before the thing they were building together disappeared beneath ice and political necessity, Cassian must have been thinking the same thing. His expression was focused now, strategic. The Ice King returning despite exhaustion and injury. When we return to Frostfang, he said quietly, we deal with Malachar. No more delays, no more political calculations. He tried to kill you. That ends. And then? Then I abdicate. Cassian met her gaze. Formally. Publicly. I name you as my successor and step down before the curse consumes what is left of my humanity. The territories will fight it. Let them. His voice carried an edge she recognized, the sound of a man who had stopped caring about consequences. You were right. 300 years of cursed kings is enough. If the Empire cannot survive without frozen rulers, then maybe it deserves to collapse. That is not strategy talking. No. Cassian smiled grimly. That is emotion. And apparently emotion makes me willing to burn kingdoms for the possibility that something better exists on the other side. Aurelia squeezed his hand. Then we burn them together. Partnership, Cassian confirmed, not possession. They sat together while the sun climbed higher and soldiers below began the grim work of burning the dead and treating the wounded and preparing to march back toward Frostfang Citadel where the real war waited. Because defeating external enemies was simpler than defeating the ones inside your own walls who smiled while calculating exactly when to strike. And Lord Malachar had spent 30 years perfecting that calculation. 3 days later, they returned to Frostfang Citadel. The journey back was slower than the march out. Too many wounded, too many bodies wrapped for burial, too many soldiers limping on injuries that would never fully heal. But they had won, broken the rebellion's spine, sent Vexley fleeing toward strongholds that would become tombs when Cassian's forces finished pursuit. Victory tasted like ash and blood, and survival purchased at costs no one wanted to calculate. The citadel gates opened to receive them. Servants and nobles gathered to witness the army's return. But the celebration felt muted, forced, like people going through motions because protocol demanded it. Aurelia rode beside Cassian at the column's head. The king sat his horse, despite the chest wound and the frost that had spread to cover half his face now. He looked like death barely contained inside armor and strategic will. But he was alive. And alive meant they still had time. Lord Malachar waited in the courtyard. The senior advisor's expression was carefully neutral, controlled. But Aurelia saw tension in his shoulders, saw calculation behind his eyes. He knew something had changed, could feel the shift in power dynamics even before anyone spoke. "Your Majesty," Malachar said with a bow, "welcome home. The Empire rejoices in your victory." Cassian dismounted, moved toward Malachar with the predatory focus of someone who had stopped pretending civilization mattered more than judgment. He stopped 3 feet from the advisor, close enough that proximity itself became threat. "We need to speak," Cassian said quietly. "Privately." "Of course, Your Majesty." Malachar's voice remained steady. "Shall I summon the council? Just you." Cassian turned toward the citadel entrance. "My chambers. Now." He walked away without waiting for response. Malachar's eyes found Aurelia's. For half a second the mask slipped. She saw rage beneath the control. Saw a man who understood he was about to face consequences for choices made in shadows. Then the mask returned. The advisor bowed slightly to her before following the king inside. Aurelia dismounted and followed. Because whatever happened next, she would witness it. Would stand beside Cassian when he confronted the man who had spent decades sacrificing kings to protect empires that did not deserve the cost. This was the real climax. Not the battle at Greythorn Pass. Not the rebellion. This. The moment when internal betrayal faced judgment and 300 years of accepted practice died because one king refused to keep bleeding for traditions built on cowardice. And somewhere deep in the citadel, in chambers designed for privacy and difficult decisions, the Ice King was about to prove that emotion did not make rulers weak. It made them willing to destroy anything that threatened the people they loved, even if that thing was the Empire itself. Cassian's chambers occupied the highest tower in Frostfang Citadel. Stone walls thick enough to muffle screams. Windows that overlooked an empire built on frozen hearts and strategic brutality. Furniture sparse and functional because kings who felt nothing had no use for comfort. Lord Malachar stood in the center of the room while Cassian closed the door behind them. The sound of the lock engaging echoed like a cell ceiling. Aurelia entered last. She positioned herself near the window where she could watch both men in the courtyard below, where soldiers still moved with the exhausted efficiency of people who had survived war but not escaped it. For 10 seconds, no one spoke. Cassian removed his armor piece by piece, black steel plates scarred by combat, silver chainmail stained with blood that was probably his own. He set each piece on the table with deliberate care, like disarming before a different kind of battle. When he finished, frost covered half his face and climbed down his neck in crystalline patterns that looked almost beautiful in the afternoon light. The curse was consuming him faster now, accelerating because he had spent 4 days feeling fear and hope and whatever else lived beneath the control he maintained for his army. He had perhaps weeks left. Maybe less. Malachar watched the king undress from war with the careful neutrality of someone calculating survival odds. "Your Majesty," the advisor began, "before you speak, I want you to understand that everything I have done has been in service to—" "You tried to kill her." Cassian's voice was flat, empty. The Ice King fully present now. "You threatened Lady Nightbane with poison because she discovered the truth about the curse, because she gave me hope that breaking it was possible, Because hope made me unpredictable, and unpredictable kings threaten advisors who profit from controlling them. He moved closer to Malachar, each step deliberate, measured. The room temperature dropped 5 degrees. I have spent 30 years serving this crown, Malachar said carefully. I watched your father die screaming. I have made sacrifices you cannot comprehend to keep this empire stable. Yes, I threatened her, because allowing her to tell you the truth would have destroyed everything I built. Everything you built. Cassian stopped 3 feet away. Not everything we built. Not the empire. Just your political structure that requires frozen kings who can be manipulated because emotion makes them controllable. That is not, do not lie to me. Frost spread across Cassian's hands. I have been analyzing your decisions for 4 days while marching toward a battle you probably hoped would kill me. Every choice you made for the past 3 decades served one purpose. Keeping Draven kings emotionally crippled so you could govern through them instead of under them. Malachar's expression hardened. You think emotion makes you strong? Look at yourself. The curse is eating you alive because you allowed yourself to feel. In 2 weeks you will be dead. That weakness destroys kings. And your solution was to let me die slowly over 5 years instead of quickly over 2 weeks. Cassian's voice carried an edge now. Something sharp beneath the emptiness. Because slow death gave you more time to consolidate power. More time to position yourself as the indispensable advisor who kept frozen kings functional. I kept this empire from collapsing into civil war. No. You postponed civil war by sacrificing kings to a curse you could have helped break generations ago. Cassian moved closer. Every king since the original betrayal has been a tool you and advisors like you used to maintain power while pretending to serve. The accusation landed like a blade. Malachar's hands curled into fists. You think breaking the curse solves anything? You think abdicating the throne to a half-blood witch will prevent the territories from tearing themselves apart? You are choosing sentiment over strategy, and it will cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Maybe. Cassian's expression was still controlled, but something lived behind his eyes now. Or maybe empires that require rulers to sacrifice their humanity are empires that deserve to collapse. Maybe 300 years of suffering is enough. Maybe I would rather die human than live as the monster you helped create. The honesty of it seemed to shock Malachar more than rage would have. The advisor stared at the king like seeing him clearly for the first time. You have changed, Malachar said quietly. She changed you, and that change will destroy everything. Good. Cassian held his gaze. Because what you built deserves destruction. Then he turned to Aurelia. His expression softened slightly, enough that she could see the man beneath the frozen weapon. Tell him, Cassian said. Tell him what you found in the library, the real terms of the curse. Aurelia stepped forward. She looked at Malachar directly. The curse breaks when a Draven king chooses love over power. Not just feels love, but proves love matters more by surrendering the throne. Abdication is the only solution. It always has been. Malachar's jaw tightened. I know. I have known since King Aldrich's reign. He chose not to abdicate because the cost was too high. And you agreed with him. Aurelia kept her voice steady. You watched him die. Watched Cassian start dying. And you did nothing because keeping cursed kings on the throne served your interests better than breaking the curse ever could. The senior advisor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had lived with brutal choices for too long. I have dedicated my entire life to serving this crown. I have made decisions that haunt me. I have sacrificed things you cannot comprehend. Yes, I prioritized empire over individual kings, because empires outlast men, because stability protects millions, even when it costs a few everything. He looked at Cassian directly. You think I am a monster. Perhaps I am. But I am a monster who kept this kingdom from collapsing into chaos that would have killed everyone you claim to protect. Cassian studied him, then spoke words that carried absolute finality. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. You will leave Frostfang Citadel tonight. If you ever return, I will execute you personally. The dismissal landed like thunder. Malachar went pale. Your Majesty, you cannot. The council answers to me. Cassian's voice was flat again, empty. I am still king, and I am ordering you to leave before I stop being civilized about consequences. For 5 seconds, Malachar just stared. Then something crumbled behind his eyes. Some structure he had built his entire identity around. He was not being executed, not being imprisoned, just dismissed, cast out, made irrelevant. And for men like Malachar, irrelevance was worse than death. The advisor bowed stiffly. "As you command, Your Majesty." He walked toward the door, stopped before opening it. "She will destroy you," he said without turning around. "Love makes kings vulnerable, and vulnerable rulers get kingdoms killed. Then I will die vulnerable." Cassian's expression did not change. "But I will die human, which is more than you ever allowed my father." Malachar left without responding. The door closed behind him with the finality of an era ending. Aurelia and Cassian stood alone in the chamber while afternoon light slanted through windows, and the curse continued eating through the king's chest, one frozen heartbeat at a time. "How long do you have?" Aurelia asked quietly. Cassian looked at his hands. Frost covered them completely now. Ice had crystallized between his fingers. "Days. Maybe a week. The curse is accelerating faster than I calculated." He met her gaze. "I need to abdicate immediately, before I lose the capacity to make that choice. The territories will fight it. Let them." Cassian moved to the window, looked out over the empire he was about to abandon. "I would rather leave chaos than leave another frozen king who spends decades dying while advisors profit from his suffering." He turned back to face her. His expression was controlled, but emotion lived beneath the surface now. Raw, visible. "I am going to summon the council tomorrow," he said. "I will announce my abdication publicly, name you as my successor, transfer all crown authority before the curse consumes what is left of my humanity. And then we see if the curse breaks, or if I die anyway." Cassian almost smiled. "Either way, I stop being king, which means for the first time in 15 years I get to be just a man, a dying man, a free man." The distinction mattered to him. You cannot understand what it is like to wear a crown that slowly kills everything human inside you. To make decisions knowing each one costs pieces of yourself. To survive by becoming the thing everyone fears. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I have been dying slowly since I was 12 years old, and in the past week you gave me more life than I had in the previous 15 years combined." The confession landed like something sacred. Aurelia stepped closer, took his frozen hands in hers. Warmth flooded between them. The ice melted. Color returned to his skin. They stood like that while the sun descended toward mountains and the Empire waited for decisions that would either save it or destroy it completely. Tomorrow, everything changed. Tomorrow, the Ice King would surrender power for love and prove 300 years of cursed rulers had been choosing wrong all along. But tonight they had this moment, this warmth, this choice to stand together despite knowing the cost. And sometimes choice was all anyone had when facing endings that could not be prevented, only embraced. The council chamber filled before dawn. Every territorial alpha, every noble house with claims to power, every general who commanded forces large enough to matter in succession disputes. They gathered beneath vaulted ceilings and ancient banners with the nervous energy of predators sensing weakness, but not understanding its source yet. Aurelia stood beside the throne wearing black silk and the silver clasp that marked her as the king's claimed mate. She looked at the assembled council and saw the same calculations that had governed her rejection ceremony weeks ago. The same hunger, the same anticipation of witnessing someone more powerful than them be humiliated. But this time was different. This time the king himself was orchestrating the spectacle. This time humiliation was choice instead of sentence. Cassian entered last. He wore full ceremonial armor despite the chest wound and the frost that now covered most of his visible skin. He moved like winter incarnate, beautiful and terrible and dying right in front of everyone. The council went silent. The Ice King ascended the throne, sat with the same controlled precision he had maintained for 15 years. His expression was empty, flat, revealing nothing. But Aurelia could see frost spreading across his jaw even as he prepared to speak. The curse was minutes away from final consumption. They had waited almost too long. Cassian's voice carried across the chamber without rising. "I have summoned this council to witness a formal declaration. Effective immediately, I am abdicating the throne of Frostfang." The chamber erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted questions. Alphas surged to their feet. Generals exchanged looks that suggested coups were being calculated in real time. Cassian raised one hand. The gesture was minimal, but the room fell silent immediately. Because even dying, the Ice King commanded absolute authority. The Draven bloodline has been cursed for 300 years, he continued. Every king who wears this crown loses humanity piece by piece until nothing remains except strategic brutality. I have watched this curse consume my father. I have felt it eating me alive, and I refuse to spend my final years becoming the monster it demands. He stood from the throne, moved to stand beside Aurelia. I am naming Lady Aurelia Nightbane as my successor. She will assume all crown authority, all territorial treaties, all military command. She is Alpha Queen of Frostfang effective the moment I finish speaking. The council exploded again, this time with rage instead of shock. Lord Garrick Vexley stood from the Eastern delegation, the man whose rebellion had cost 2,000 lives. His voice boomed across the chamber. This is treason. You cannot abdicate to a half-blood witch with no claim to succession. The territories will never accept her authority. Then the territories can rebel, Cassian replied, and I will personally lead forces to crush anyone who challenges the queen I have chosen. You just abdicated. You have no authority to— I am still breathing. Cassian's voice went cold, which means I am still the most dangerous man in this empire. Test me if you doubt that. The threat landed like ice water. Garrick fell silent. But rage lived behind his eyes, the kind of rage that would fester and metastasize into violence the moment the king showed weakness. Another alpha stood. Western territories. Younger. His voice was more measured. Your Majesty, with respect, even if we accept your abdication, Lady Nightbane has no experience governing, no military background, no political alliances. She would be queen in title only. The empire would collapse within months. Then teach her. Cassian looked at Aurelia. His expression softened for just a second. She survived public rejection without breaking. She stood in front of this council and challenged you without fear. She walked onto a battlefield with no training and kept soldiers alive through magic you all claim to fear. If you think she is weak, you are confusing unfamiliarity with inability. He returned his attention to the assembly. And if this empire cannot survive under a ruler who values humanity over strategic cruelty, then perhaps it does not deserve to survive at all. The honesty of it seemed to shock the council into silence. Because kings did not say things like that. Kings did not question the fundamental structure of power they inherited. Kings survived by accepting that empire mattered more than individual conscience. But Cassian was not surviving anymore. He was choosing, and that choice was about to rewrite everything. The Ice King removed his crown, silver metal etched with kill marks and territorial symbols that documented 300 years of frozen rulers. He placed it on Aurelia's head. The weight of it settled across her skull like physical pressure, heavier than metal should be. Like the crown itself carried memory of every king who had worn it and died beneath its curse. Cassian stepped back. Then he knelt. The gesture sent shock through the chamber like lightning through water. Kings did not kneel. Not to anyone. Not for anything. But Cassian knelt before Aurelia and spoke words that would echo through territorial politics for generations. I, Cassian Draven, last of the cursed bloodline, surrender all crown authority to Queen Aurelia Nightbane. I pledge my service to her reign. I offer my life in defense of her rule. And I declare before this assembly that anyone who challenges her challenges me directly. He looked up at her. Frost covered his entire face now. His eyes were the only thing still alive, still warm. Rule better than I did, he said quietly. Rule like you still remember what it means to be human. Then he collapsed. The curse struck like lightning through his chest. Ice exploded across his body. His breathing stopped. Frost crystallized over his eyes. Aurelia dropped beside him. Her crown fell, clattered across marble. She pressed her hands to his chest and let magic ignite with everything she had left. Golden fire poured into frozen flesh, fighting ice that had consumed 300 years of kings and was not surrendering without destroying its final victim. The council watched in silence. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared at the dying king and the half-blood queen trying to save him through magic their ancestors had burned witches for practicing. Aurelia felt the curse fighting back, felt it trying to freeze Cassian's heart completely. felt 3 centuries of grief and rage and betrayal concentrated into killing the one king who had finally chosen love over power. But she had her mother's magic, had witch blood that healed instead of harmed, had weeks of learning to channel power she barely understood, and she was not letting him die. Not here, not like this. She pushed harder, more fire, more magic, everything. The crown that had fallen beside her began to glow, silver metal heating until it burned white hot. Then it cracked, fractures spreading across ancient metal like ice breaking on frozen lakes. The curse screamed through the chamber, windows shattered, banners ignited, the throne itself split down the center. Then everything went silent. The crown shattered completely, pieces scattered across marble. 300 years of cursed authority destroyed in seconds, and Cassian gasped, breath like a man pulled from drowning. Color flooded back into his skin. The frost melted. His eyes opened, and they were warm, alive, completely human for the first time in 15 years. He stared at Aurelia, then at the shattered crown, then at the council that had watched their entire world break apart. "It worked," he whispered. "The curse is gone." Aurelia collapsed beside him, exhausted, shaking, her magic burned to nothing. But he was alive, and the curse that had killed generations of kings had finally released its grip because one ruler had chosen love over empire. The council remained silent, stunned, processing. Then someone began to clap, slow, deliberate. One of the younger alphas from the Western territories. Others joined. Not celebration, just acknowledgement. Recognition that they had witnessed something that would be discussed for generations. The Ice King had broken a 300-year curse by surrendering the one thing that defined him. And somehow, he had survived. But Garrick Vexley was not clapping. The Eastern Alpha stood with murder in his eyes. His hand moved toward the blade at his belt. The doors to the council chamber exploded inward. Royal guards flooded the room, 50 soldiers in full combat armor. They surrounded the Eastern delegation with weapons drawn and expressions that promised violence. Behind them walked the scarred general who had commanded at Greythorn Pass. His armor still carried bloodstains from the battle. His voice was steady. "Lord Garrick Vexley, you are under arrest for rebellion against the crown, conspiracy to assassinate a ruling monarch, and treason against territorial treaties you swore to uphold." Garrick's face went pale. "This is... Your forces surrendered 2 days ago," the general continued. "Your allies abandoned you when pursuit caught them fleeing toward eastern strongholds. You are alone, isolated. And under Crown authority, the penalty for your crimes is execution." He looked at Aurelia. "Your Majesty, what are your orders?" The chamber went silent. Every eye turned toward the woman wearing no crown, but carrying its authority anyway. Aurelia stood slowly. She looked at Garrick Vexley, at the man whose son had rejected her, whose orchestrated humiliation had set everything in motion. She thought about vengeance, about making him suffer the way she had suffered, about proving power by destroying enemies. Then she thought about her mother, about magic used to heal instead of harm, about choosing mercy where ancestors had chosen rage. "Imprison him," Aurelia said. Her voice carried across the chamber without shouting. "Hold him until the Eastern Territories send representatives to negotiate his fate, but do not execute him. Not yet. Let his own people decide whether he dies for choices that cost them thousands of soldiers and decades of stability." The general nodded. "As you command, Your Majesty." Guards seized Garrick, dragged him from the council chamber while he shouted protests that dissolved into incoherent rage. When the doors closed behind them, Aurelia turned to face the remaining council, alphas and nobles who were recalculating power dynamics in real time. She picked up the shattered pieces of the crown, held them in her hands. "This crown has killed kings for 300 years, she said quietly. It demanded that rulers sacrifice humanity for power, that they govern through fear instead of earned loyalty, that they die slowly while pretending strength meant emptiness." She dropped the pieces. They clattered across marble. "I will not wear it. I will not perpetuate what it represents. If I am queen, I rule without the symbol that cursed every king before me." She looked at each alpha directly, meeting their eyes without flinching. "Some of you will test me. Some will rebel. Some will assume that refusing the crown means I am weak. Let me be clear. I survived rejection in front of 300 wolves without begging. I walked onto battlefields with no training and kept soldiers alive. I broke a curse that destroyed generations of rulers more experienced than me. Her voice hardened. I am not weak. I am just choosing to rule differently than men who valued empire over humanity. And anyone who mistakes mercy for vulnerability will learn exactly how dangerous I become when protecting what matters. The council was silent, processing, calculating. Then the scarred general knelt. His armor scraped against stone. I pledge my service to Queen Aurelia, he said, not because of bloodline or tradition, but because I have seen enough frozen kings sacrifice soldiers for strategic necessity. I would rather serve a ruler who values humanity than one who treats lives as currency. Other generals followed, then nobles, then territorial alphas who understood that power was shifting and they could either adapt or become irrelevant. Not everyone knelt. Some watched with barely concealed hostility. Some would leave this chamber and begin planning rebellion. But enough knelt that Aurelia understood she had what mattered most. Enough support to govern, enough authority to make choices, enough power to defend what she was trying to build. She looked at Cassian. He was sitting now, still weak but alive, completely free of frost for the first time since childhood. He smiled at her, real, warm, unpracticed but genuine, and that smile was worth more than every crown that had ever been forged. Maka. Spring arrived in Frostfang 3 months later. Snow melted from black towers. Gardens bloomed across courtyards that had been frozen for decades. Children laughed inside palace walls that had once echoed with nothing except strategic discussions and political maneuvering. The empire was changing, slowly, painfully, but changing. Aurelia stood on the balcony overlooking the citadel while sunset painted mountains gold and crimson. She wore simple clothing now. No crown, no ceremonial armor, just fabric that allowed movement and comfort. Because queens did not need symbols when they governed through earned respect instead of inherited fear. Cassian found her there. He moved with the easy grace of someone no longer dying, no longer frozen, just alive. He stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "How was the council meeting?" he asked. Brutal. Aurelia almost smiled. 3 alphas threatened rebellion. 2 demanded I prove legitimacy through combat trials. 1 suggested marriage alliances to secure territorial loyalty. And I told them I survived worse than their posturing, that they could accept my authority or leave the empire, and that marriage alliances were not negotiable because I am already committed to a former king who gave up everything to break a curse. Cassian looked at her, studied her face in the dying light. What did they say to that? Most accepted. Some will plot. Some will test boundaries until they understand I mean what I say. She turned to meet his gaze. This is going to be long, difficult, probably violent in places. I know. Cassian touched her hand. But you are doing what no cursed king could do. You are ruling without sacrificing humanity, building something better instead of just maintaining what existed. Do you regret it? Aurelia asked. Giving up the throne, surrendering power. Every day. His honesty was gentle, brutal. I was a king for 15 years. That identity is not easy to shed. But then I remember what I was becoming, the frozen weapon I would have died as. And I realized that living as a man beside you is worth more than dying as a monster alone. They stood together while the sun disappeared and stars emerged over mountains that had witnessed 300 years of cursed rulers destroying themselves piece by piece. What will you do now? Aurelia asked. You are not king, not advisor, not anything the empire has structure for. I am yours. Cassian said it simply. Whatever that means. However you need me. I will spend whatever years I have left trying to deserve the choice you made when you saved me. The honesty of it landed like something sacred. Aurelia pulled him close, kissed him, while the empire stretched out below them, and the future remained uncertain and dangerous and full of challenges neither of them fully understood how to face. But they would face them together, partnership instead of possession, love instead of strategy, risk instead of safety. Because the strongest rulers were not the ones who inspired fear forever. They were the ones remembered after the fear died. The ones who proved that humanity mattered more than empire. That choosing love over power was not weakness, but the most dangerous strength anyone could wield. Far above Frostfang Citadel, winter clouds finally broke apart completely, and for the first time in 300 years, warm wind touched the throne that no longer existed. The Empire would survive or it would not. Territories would remain loyal or they would rebel. The future held battles and betrayals and brutal choices that would test everything Aurelia believed about mercy and strength and what it meant to rule. But tonight she stood beside a man who had given up everything to prove love mattered, and that was enough. Because sometimes the most powerful thing anyone could do was choose vulnerability when the entire world demanded armor. Choose humanity when survival seemed to require becoming a monster. Choose love when every strategic calculation suggested power mattered more. And in those choices, in those moments of terrifying honesty, empires either broke apart completely or transformed into something worth defending. Aurelia looked out over Frostfang and made a silent promise to every frozen king who had come before. To every ruler who had sacrificed humanity because they believed they had no choice. She would prove them wrong, would build an empire where rulers stayed human instead of becoming weapons, where love was strength instead of liability, where mercy was not weakness but the courage to believe something better was possible. It would cost her, would demand sacrifices she could not predict, would require becoming harder and softer simultaneously in ways that contradicted everything previous rulers had believed about power. But she had survived worse, had walked through fire and war and curses that killed generations, had stood in front of councils that wanted her dead and refused to break. And beside her stood a man who had chosen to die human rather than live as a monster, who had surrendered the crown to save his soul, who loved her enough to trust she could build what he never could. Together they watched night settle over the empire, watched stars emerge over mountains that would witness whatever came next. And somewhere in the darkness, wolves howled, not in challenge or fear, just acknowledging that something had changed, that the old order was dying, that whatever came next would be different than anything that came before. The Ice King was gone, the cursed bloodline broken, the throne destroyed, but the empire survived, transformed, becoming something that might actually deserve the loyalty it demanded. And in the highest tower of Frostfang Citadel, two people who had lost everything and found each other stood together and refused to let the darkness win. Because light did not come from power or crowns or symbols that demanded sacrifice. It came from choosing love when everything suggested fear was safer. From choosing humanity when becoming a monster seemed easier. From choosing hope when despair looked like the only rational response. And that light, fragile as it was, impossible as it seemed, was enough to illuminate even the darkest empire ever built.